My wife said therapy was helping, then I found the messages. It was 1:12 a.m. when her phone lit up on the nightstand. I was awake because the heat kicked on and made that dry, clicking sound through the vents. She was asleep on her side, breathing through her mouth, one arm flung across my chest like she'd anchored herself there. The screen lit up with a banner notification. I wasn't trying to read it. It was just there, bright in the dark. "You did really well today." That was the whole line. No name, just a number. I waited for the screen to go black again. It didn't. Another buzz followed, softer this time, like the phone was trying not to wake us. "Proud of you." My first thought was her therapist. She'd been saying therapy was helping. She'd said it the way people say the weather is finally turning. Relief mixed with caution. Still, therapists don't text at 1 in the morning. They don't say they're proud of you. They don't say you did really well today. I lifted her arm off me slowly. She didn't stir. I slid the phone off the stand and held it low near my hip so the light wouldn't spill across her face. The lock screen had a picture of us from the beach last year. She'd cropped it so you could barely see me. I noticed that, even then. I told myself to put it back. I didn't. I put my thumb on the side button and the Face ID opened it. She'd set my face up months ago because her hands were always wet when she cooked, and she hated touching the screen. The messages were open already. The thread wasn't long. That made it worse. No scrolling, no searching. The last message from her was sent 12 minutes earlier. I didn't tell him. I couldn't. The reply came almost immediately after. "You don't have to yet. You're doing the right thing." There was a typing bubble under that, then nothing. I scrolled up. My chest felt hollow like when you miss a step in the dark. Her earlier message read, "Therapy helped today." I finally said it, out loud. The reply, "I know that took a lot. I'm here." My heart was beating in my ears. I checked the contact, still no name. Just a number with a local area code. I went back further. He asked why I've been lighter. I told him it was the breathing exercises. That's not a lie. It feels like one. You're allowed to have parts of your life. That line sat there, clean and calm, like advice printed on a card. I locked the phone and stared at the ceiling. The vents clicked again. I could hear a car pass on the street. I thought about waking her up and holding the phone between us like evidence. I thought about putting it back and pretending I'd never seen it. I thought about who would text a married woman at 1 in the morning and tell her she was allowed to have parts of her life. I unlocked it again. There was a photo further down the thread. Not a nude, not even her face. Just a picture of a notebook page with her handwriting. I recognized it because I've seen it on grocery lists, on envelopes. The picture was of a sentence written in blue ink. "I am not responsible for other people's feelings." The reply under the photo said, "This is important. Keep this." I heard her shift behind me. I froze, phone in my hand. She rolled onto her back and snorted softly, then went still again. I sat up and swung my legs over the side of the bed. The floor was cold. I walked to the bathroom and shut the door, turning the light on. My face in the mirror looked older than it had yesterday. I locked the door and sat on the edge of the tub. I opened the contact info. The number was saved under a single letter, M. There was a call log. 2 missed calls from her to M earlier that evening. One answered call, 17 minutes long, at 6:48 p.m. That was during her therapy appointment. She told me she was running late because the session went long. I'd made pasta and kept it warm. I scrolled back further. Weeks of messages. Not every day. Sometimes just a check-in. Sometimes nothing for days. Then a cluster. He's trying. I see that. I don't know if I can. You don't have to decide now. I hate lying. You're protecting yourself. There were voice messages. I didn't play them. I didn't trust myself not to hear her voice saying things she never said to me. At the top of the thread, the first message wasn't from her. It was from M. "If you decide to start, I'll need to be clear about boundaries." Her reply came an hour later. "I understand. I just need help." The timestamp on that first message was 3 months ago, the day after she came home from therapy smiling for the first time in a year and said, "I think this is finally going to work." My hands were shaking. I set the phone down on the counter and pressed my palms flat, breathing through my nose the way she'd taught me. I picked it up again and went to the contact details. There was an option to share location. It was on, not with me. With M. I heard a knock at the bathroom door, soft. "Hey," she said, her voice thick with sleep. "What are you doing?" I didn't answer right away. I stared at the phone, at the letter M, at the shared location pin, glowing quietly like a secret. I couldn't sleep, I said finally. "Your phone went off." There was a pause. I could hear her swallow through the door. "Can you open the door?" she asked. I unlocked it and stepped back. She stood there in one of my old t-shirts, hair sticking up on one side, eyes already alert in a way that told me she knew. I held the phone out to her. "Who is M?" She looked at the screen and then at me. Her face didn't collapse. It didn't get defensive. She just nodded, once, like she'd been waiting for this. "It's my therapist," she said. Then, after a beat that felt measured, she added, "Sort of." I waited for more. She didn't say it. I looked down at the phone again, at the messages about boundaries, about protecting herself, about not telling me. "That's not how therapy works," I said. She leaned against the doorframe and closed her eyes. "I know," she said. "That's why I didn't tell you." We sat at the kitchen table with the lights off except for the one over the sink. It was almost 2 a.m. The pasta was still in the fridge from earlier, congealed in the pot. I noticed stupid things like that because it kept me from looking at her. She wrapped both hands around a mug she hadn't filled. She always did that when she was bracing herself, like the shape of the mug mattered more than what was inside it. "I didn't mean for it to happen like this," she said. I didn't respond. I was trying to understand how we'd gotten here without me noticing. We'd been married 9 years, together for 12. We met in grad school when neither of us had money and everything felt temporary. We moved 3 times in the first 4 years. Different apartments, different jobs, always saying once things settled, we'd be better versions of ourselves. Things did settle. That was the problem. She started therapy last fall after her mother died. It wasn't sudden, but it wasn't slow either. 6 months from diagnosis to hospice. I took over most of the logistics because that's what I do. I made calls, filled out forms, scheduled appointments. My wife handled the bedside stuff, sitting, talking, holding her mother's hand when she slept. I told myself we were dividing the load fairly. After the funeral, my wife went quiet. Not withdrawn exactly, just flat. She laughed at jokes, but it didn't reach her eyes. She slept too much or not at all. I suggested therapy once. She said maybe. I suggested it again a month later, and she snapped at me, then cried, then apologized. 2 weeks after that, she booked an appointment herself and told me over dinner like it was a neutral update. I start therapy on Tuesdays, she said. I found someone nearby. I asked if she wanted to talk about it. She said not yet. I said okay. I meant it. The therapist's name, according to her, was Mark. She said he specialized in grief and anxiety. She said he was direct, which she liked. The sessions were supposed to be 50 minutes, but sometimes she'd be gone longer. She said it took time to decompress. I believed her. I was proud of her for going. She started changing in small ways. She bought a notebook and started writing in it at night. She stopped drinking wine during the week. She began correcting me when I spoke for her in social situations. Not sharply, just, actually, that's not quite how I feel. It stung, but I told myself this was growth. Therapy was helping. That was the phrase she kept using. What do you mean, sort of? I asked now, finally looking at her. She rubbed her thumb along the rim of the mug. He's licensed. He was my therapist. He stopped being my therapist. When? She hesitated. About 6 weeks ago. And you kept seeing him? She shook her head quickly. Not seeing, talking, sometimes texting. I didn't go back for sessions. But you called him during your session time, I said. I hated how steady my voice sounded. She nodded. Once. I thought about that 17-minute call, about me stirring pasta and checking the clock. Why? I asked. She exhaled slowly. Because when we stopped officially, I felt like I was falling off a cliff. He said we shouldn't continue in a therapeutic way, but he didn't want to just disappear. He said continuity mattered. I stared at her. So he told you it was okay to keep talking. He said we could check in, as people. As people, I repeated. She looked up at me then. Her eyes were wet but focused. Nothing physical happened, she said, if that's what you're thinking. That's not the bar, I said. She flinched. I know. We sat there in silence again. I tried to reconcile the woman across from me with the messages on the phone, with the way she'd been lighter, like she said, with the way she'd started humming while doing dishes. I thought therapy was doing that. I'd even told a coworker, she's finally turning a corner. Did he know you were married? I asked. Yes. Did he know about me? Yes. And he still told you you didn't have to tell me. She closed her eyes. He said it wasn't about secrecy, it was about timing. I laughed once, sharp and humorless. That's convenient. She didn't argue. She just nodded again, smaller this time. I asked to see the notebook. She stood up without a word and went to the bedroom. When she came back, she placed it on the table and pushed it toward me like a confession. I opened it. Most of it was what you'd expect. Lists, prompts, half-written thoughts. There were pages about her mother, pages about work, pages about feeling invisible. My name came up more than once, not cruelly, just distantly, like I was a fixed object in the room. Dependable, heavy. There were also notes clearly written during sessions, bullet points. One page had boundaries written at the top. Under it, in her handwriting, emotional intimacy counts. I closed the notebook. So what is he to you now? I asked. She swallowed. I don't know. That's not an answer. It's the only honest one I have. I stood up and walked to the sink. The mug in my hand was still empty. I filled it with water and drank it all at once, then filled it again. My hands weren't shaking anymore. That scared me more. I feel like I'm standing in a room that's been rearranged, I said, staring out the dark window, and everyone else knew about it. She came up behind me but didn't touch me. I didn't mean to shut you out. But you did. Yes. I turned around. Did he ever tell you to leave me? Her eyes widened. No. Did you ever talk about it? She hesitated, then nodded. I talked about feeling trapped. He said feelings aren't decisions. And what did you say? I said I didn't know which feelings were mine and which ones I'd learned to manage for other people. For me, I said. For you, she agreed. We stood there, facing each other, the space between us full of words that hadn't been said for years. I thought about how often I'd smoothed things over, how often I'd decided something was fine because it was easier. I wondered when that turned into something she needed to escape from. Are you still talking to him? I asked. She nodded. Yes. Tonight? She nodded again. Yes. I reached for the phone, still sitting on the counter, and slid it toward her. Then I need you to stop. She looked at the phone, then at me. Her jaw tightened. I need you to choose what I said, right now. She didn't answer immediately. She picked up the phone, turned it face down, and rested her palm on top of it like she was keeping it from moving. I need time, she said. I watched her hand on the phone. I thought about the shared location, about the letter M, about how calmly she'd said, sort of. Take it, I said, but understand that time doesn't freeze things. It changes them. She nodded, but she didn't move her hand. That was when I realized that whatever therapy had been helping her do, it hadn't included learning how to stay. The next morning, she acted like we were in a holding pattern. Not calm, not frantic, careful. She made coffee, asked if I wanted eggs, wiped the counter twice in the same spot. I watched her like I was trying to catch a trick with my peripheral vision. I went to work late. She didn't ask why. Around noon, she texted me. I canceled today's check-in. No explanation. Just that. I didn't reply. That evening, I asked if she'd ended it. Not dramatically. We were folding laundry. Socks, towels, normal stuff. I told him, we need space, she said. For now. For now, I repeated. She looked at me then, steady. You're asking me to cut off the only place I've been able to say things out loud. I'm asking you to stop talking to a man who crossed a professional line with my wife. He didn't cross it, she said quickly, too quickly. He named it. He said that's why we had to stop the formal sessions. But he didn't stop, I said. He just changed the label. She pressed a towel flat on the table like it might wrinkle if she didn't. You don't understand what it was like in there. In therapy? In my head, she said. He helped me see patterns, how I disappear. I waited. She wanted me to ask how. I didn't. He said you benefit from me being easy, she added. There it was. Not an accusation. A diagnosis. Did you say that? I asked. Or did he? She hesitated. Just long enough. He helped me put words to it, she said. That night, I couldn't sleep. Around 11, her phone buzzed again. She was in the shower. I didn't pick it up. I didn't need to. I already knew. The next day, I called the clinic listed on her intake form. I didn't pretend to be her. I gave my name, asked to verify something. They told me Mark hadn't worked there in over a year. I sat in my car with the engine off, phone still warm in my hand. I checked the messages again. The first one. If you decide to start, I'll need to be clear about boundaries. Start what? When I confronted her that night, she didn't deny it. She sat down slowly, like her legs gave out all at once. He wasn't my therapist when we met, she said. He said he could help anyway. How did you meet him? She looked at the floor. At a grief support group. He was facilitating, not licensed, just experienced. And the therapy? She shrugged. It sounded cleaner. That was the moment it clicked. Not an affair, not exactly. She hadn't gone to therapy to fix herself. She'd gone to find someone who would agree with her before I ever had a chance to speak. Things escalated quietly, which somehow made it worse. There was no screaming, no dramatic ultimatums, just a steady shift where I realized I was no longer part of the conversation that mattered. She started guarding her phone again, not obviously, just small adjustments, taking it into the bathroom, turning the screen away, when she sat on the couch. If I walked into a room, she'd pause before locking it, the kind of habits you don't notice unless you already know what they mean. I asked if she was still talking to him. She said, not like before. I asked what that meant. She said, less. Less wasn't none. We tried to talk about us, but every discussion felt supervised by someone who wasn't there. She'd use phrases that didn't sound like her. Holding space. Non-defensive listening. Your reaction is understandable. But, always a but. Always a pause where I could feel something being filtered. One night I asked her directly, do you tell him what I say? She didn't answer right away. She just leaned back against the counter and crossed her arms. Sometimes, she said, so he knows my side of this. He knows how it affects me. That's not the same thing. She looked tired then, not guilty, resolved. He helps me process. He's not qualified, I said. You know that now. He understands me, she replied. That was the first time I felt something close to panic. Not jealousy, replacement, like I'd been slowly swapped out for a version of myself described to someone else. I started replaying the past few months differently. Her confidence, her distance, the way she'd stop me mid-sentence and say, let me finish. I thought she was learning to assert herself. Now I wondered who'd taught her which parts of me to push against. The real escalation came when she said she needed a weekend away. Alone, she said, to think. Where? I asked. Just a hotel, she said, in the city. I asked if he'd suggested it. She didn't say no. That night, after she fell asleep, I checked her phone again. I hated myself for it, but the door was already open. There were new messages. Not romantic, not explicit. Worse. You don't owe him certainty. It's okay if clarity upsets him. You're allowed to prioritize your growth. I put the phone down and sat there in the dark, listening to her breathe, realizing something had shifted from confusion to strategy. Whatever this was, it wasn't accidental anymore. It was being managed. The proof didn't come from her phone. That surprised me. By then, I'd learned how carefully she curated what stayed there. It came from my email. On Tuesday afternoon, between a calendar reminder and a shipping confirmation, there was a message with no subject line. The sender's address was a Gmail account made of a first initial and a last name I didn't recognize. The preview text read, I think you deserve to know what's actually happening. I didn't open it right away. I stared at it for a full minute, then forwarded it to myself like that would make it safer. I went out to my car and sat there before reading it. The email was short. No drama, no apologies. It said Mark had been running informal therapeutic support groups for years. It said he'd been asked to stop multiple times. It said he had a pattern of positioning himself as a guide during vulnerable transitions, then maintaining contact after the groups ended. It said my wife wasn't the first married woman to believe she was having a uniquely clarifying connection with him. There was an attachment, a screenshot of a message from Mark sent to the Gmail sender 6 months earlier. Your partner doesn't need to understand this yet. Growth often looks like betrayal from the outside. I felt sick, but not shocked. That was the worst part. At the bottom of the email was a line that made my hands go cold. I'm his sister. I drove home early. My wife was already there, packing a small bag on the bed. The hotel weekend. She looked up when I came in, mid-fold, like she'd been expecting me at some point, but not then. I know, I said. She froze. Know what? I handed her my phone, opened to the email. She read it slowly. I watched her face change, piece by piece. Confusion first, then recognition, then something like fear. He told me they were lies, she said weakly. You never asked me, I said. She sat down on the edge of the bed, the bag slumping beside her. He said if anyone reached out, it was because they couldn't handle the work. I pointed at the screenshot. He coached you to see doubt as proof. She didn't argue. She just stared at the floor. I checked for the group registration, I said. He charged under a different name. No credentials. No oversight. She looked up then, eyes red. I didn't sleep with him. I know, I said, and I meant it. That was the twist she hadn't prepared for. This wasn't an affair I could rage against. It was worse. She hadn't betrayed me with desire. She'd betrayed me with belief. The fallout didn't look like I expected. There were no slammed doors, no crying on the floor. It was quieter than that, heavier. She canceled the hotel, unpacked the bag without comment. That night, we slept in the same bed and didn't touch. I lay on my back, staring at the ceiling while she curled toward the edge like she was giving me space I hadn't asked for. The next morning, she said, I feel stupid. I didn't say anything. I didn't want to comfort her. That realization scared me. She tried to explain how it felt from the inside, how he'd seemed calm, certain, how every doubt she'd had about herself suddenly had language, how when he said things, they landed with authority, like they'd been true long before she arrived. He never told me what to do, she said. He just framed things. I nodded. I understood framing. I do it for a living. You don't lie. You just choose which edges to show. She said she felt hollow now, like the ground had dropped out from under a version of herself she'd just learned how to stand on. She said she didn't know what was hers anymore, her anger, her clarity, her distance from me. That was the part that hurt. Not that she'd been misled, that she wasn't sure which parts of her pulling away had come from him and which parts had been waiting anyway. I asked if she'd blocked him. She said yes, then added, I didn't tell him why. I didn't ask her to. Over the next few days, she oscillated between shame and defensiveness, 1 minute apologizing for everything, the next insisting the issues she'd raised were still real, even if the source was compromised. Both things can be true, she said. I knew that. That didn't make it easier. I felt stupid too, in a different way. Like I'd been asleep in my own marriage, mistaking cooperation for intimacy. I replayed moments I'd brushed past, times she'd gone quiet and I'd let it be because conflict felt inefficient. At night, I felt a pressure in my chest that wouldn't settle. Not anger, loss. Something had cracked open and I didn't know what was supposed to fill it. She asked if I hated her. I said no. Then I paused and said, I don't trust us right now. She nodded like she'd expected that. I don't trust me either, she said. We sat on opposite ends of the couch, the space between us filled with all the things we hadn't said before someone else had stepped in and said them for us. The consequences didn't arrive all at once. They trickled in through normal channels, disguised as errands and appointments. Her work started to notice first. She missed a deadline, then another. Her supervisor asked if everything was okay. She came home one afternoon and said they'd suggested she take a few days off. Not officially, just to reset. She said it like it was a kindness. I heard the warning underneath it. She tried to find a new therapist, a real one. The intake forms asked questions she couldn't answer cleanly. Previous therapy? Yes. Duration? Complicated? Reason for termination? She'd freeze at that one, pen hovering, then check a box that said other. One clinic declined her after the consult. Another said they didn't have capacity. She took it personally, even when I told her not to. She said it felt like being rejected for something she hadn't known she was doing wrong. The sister emailed again, not to accuse, to update. She said there were 2 formal complaints pending. That Mark had gone quiet. That he tended to disappear when things caught up to him. She didn't ask us to participate. She just wanted us to be aware. My wife read the email 3 times. Then, she asked me to delete it. I didn't. I archived it instead. Friends started to sense something was off. We canceled dinner plans. Twice. My brother asked if we were okay. I said yes automatically, then spent the rest of the evening irritated with myself for how easily the word came out. We stopped touching entirely. Not out of punishment. Out of uncertainty. Every physical gesture felt loaded, like it meant something neither of us was ready to define. One night she said, I don't know how to be a wife right now. I didn't know how to respond to that. I didn't want her to perform a role. I wanted to know if she still wanted to be here. I started sleeping in the guest room after that, not because we agreed on it, because one night I didn't follow her to bed and neither of us commented. The distance made things clearer and worse at the same time. Without the routines, there was nowhere to hide. We had long, careful conversations that circled the same questions without landing anywhere. Was the marriage broken before he entered the picture, or did he teach her how to see it that way? Did my steadiness feel like safety or like erasure? Was trust something we could rebuild, or had it been quietly rerouted to someone else long before it snapped? There were no satisfying answers, just consequences unfolding at a human pace. By the end of the month, we were no longer in crisis. We were in something slower, something that required a decision neither of us had made yet. What changed first wasn't our situation, it was how I started reacting to it. I noticed it one morning when I realized I hadn't thought about Mark at all the day before, not consciously. My chest hadn't tightened at his name. I hadn't replayed messages in my head. Instead, I'd spent the day thinking about my own routines, how quiet the house felt, how much time I had in the evenings now that I wasn't orbiting around her moods. That scared me more than the anger ever had. I started taking longer walks after work. No headphones. Just moving. Letting thoughts surface without steering them. I realized how much of my sense of self had been tied to being needed, to anticipating, to smoothing. I'd always framed it as being attentive, supportive. I hadn't considered how it also kept me from asking for much in return. When she talked now, I listened differently, not defensively, but not reflexively either. If something hurt, I said so. If I didn't understand, I didn't fill in the gaps. The first time I said, "That doesn't work for me," she looked startled, like she was seeing me from a new angle. She was unraveling in her own way, questioning everything she'd learned to label as growth, second-guessing instincts she'd trusted, watching herself for signs of manipulation, then worrying that the watching itself was another form of control. She said she felt like her internal compass had been tampered with. I felt oddly steady. One night she asked, "Are you pulling away?" I thought about it before answering. "I'm standing still," I said. "You're just not used to seeing that." She nodded slowly. I could tell she was trying to decide whether that was a threat or an observation. I began to understand something uncomfortable. Even without Mark, even without the deception, something fundamental between us had shifted. Not because she'd changed, but because I hadn't. I could see the outlines of a life where I wasn't constantly calibrating myself around another person's needs. That didn't mean I wanted to leave. It meant I no longer felt like staying was the only way to remain intact. That realization settled in quietly, without drama, and once it was there, I couldn't pretend I hadn't had it. The decision didn't arrive in a single moment. It assembled itself over a few weeks, through ordinary scenes that no longer felt shared. One evening, she told me she'd finally booked with a licensed therapist. She said it carefully, like she was offering proof of effort. I thanked her and meant it. Then she asked if I wanted to do couples counseling again. Again mattered. We'd gone once, years ago, after a fight that fizzled out before it reached anything structural. Back then, I'd treated it like maintenance. This time, it felt like triage. I don't think I should, I said. She looked at me, really looked, like she was checking for sarcasm. Because of him? No, I said. Because of me. I told her I needed time that wasn't about repairing or processing or redefining us. Time where I wasn't orienting my thoughts around whether the marriage could be saved. I said I needed to know who I was without being in constant negotiation. She asked if that meant separation. Not legally, I said. Not yet. But functionally, yes. We sat with that. No tears. Just the sound of the dishwasher running in the background. A week later, I moved fully into the guest room. We told friends different versions of the truth depending on how well they knew us. I stopped correcting her when she framed it as mutual space. It wasn't worth it. What surprised me was the relief. Not happiness, relief. Like I'd been holding a position for years and finally set it down. I missed her, but I didn't miss the constant self-editing. One night, she asked if this was punishment. "It's not," I said. "It's a boundary." She nodded slowly. I could see her trying to place it in the language she'd learned. I didn't help. The decision, once named, didn't feel dramatic. It felt permanent. Not because I knew how it would end, but because I knew I wouldn't undo it just to restore comfort. For the first time since this started, I trusted myself completely. That was enough to move forward, even without knowing where forward led. We didn't announce anything. There was no final conversation where we defined the end. Life just kept reorganizing itself around the decision I'd already made. She moved some of her things into storage. Not all, just enough to make the house feel provisional. She started staying late at work, then occasionally not coming home at all, sending a text around 10 saying she was at a friend's place. I didn't ask which friend. I stopped wondering. We were polite, sometimes warm, like two people who shared a long history and knew better than to damage it further. We talked about logistics, bills, the car, who would keep the dog if things became more official. None of it felt urgent, just inevitable. Once, over takeout eaten from separate ends of the table, she said, "I wish I'd told you earlier." I believed her. That didn't change anything. The sister emailed one last time to say Mark had been formally barred from facilitating groups through that organization. No legal action, just removal. Quiet, administrative, the kind of ending that lets someone resurface somewhere else under a new name. I told my wife. She closed her eyes and nodded, like she was filing it away as confirmation of something she already knew. I don't think he ruined my life," she said later. "I think he interrupted it." I didn't respond. I wasn't sure where that left me in the story she was telling herself. Eventually, she asked if I still loved her. I took a long time with that one. "Yes," I said, "but not in a way that makes decisions for me anymore." She accepted that. Or at least she didn't argue. A month later, I signed a lease on a small apartment across town. When I told her, she hugged me. It was brief and careful and familiar. When she let go, I felt something close, finally, to closure. The first night alone, I sat on the floor with my back against the wall and listened to the city through the window. Sirens, voices, ordinary life continuing. I thought about therapy, about belief, about how easily certainty can be borrowed from someone who sounds confident. Then I thought about the quiet clarity that comes when you stop outsourcing your sense of reality. I slept well that night. That felt like the truest aftermath of all.